Scripture reading this morning is actually the text of our whole lesson. It's from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 11. Keep in mind that in the lessons we've had in the past several weeks, Jesus arrived in Jerusalem for the very last time. He's in the last week of his life, and he has been staying in the evenings in Bethany, probably at the home of Martha and Mary. And they've just been going in and out every day. And so at the end of one day, oh, there they are. I'll wait till I get the right ones. Thank you. Okay, well, that's only a little embarrassing. So Jesus came to the end of one of those days, and in verse 9, remember Jesus had been talking about the fact that he is going to have to be planted. The seed has to die and be planted before it can grow up and bear fruit, and that he was referring to himself. And he had on the morning, the day before, he had come into to the city, and before he got to Jerusalem, on the way, he saw a fig tree that had leaves, which indicated that it should have had fruit, because the fruit comes on either before or right at the same time with the leaves. So if it's full of leaves, it should have had figs. But he went to it, he was hungry, and he didn't find any figs. So he cursed the fig tree. This was for a lesson about bearing fruit to the people of Israel, especially the leadership who were not really bearing fruit. They were placing more burdens on the people than helping them at all. And so Jesus used the fig tree, the unbearing fig tree, to teach his disciples a lesson about bearing fruit. Anyway, then evening came of that evening, and in verse 19 it says, when evening had come, he went out of the city. Now in the morning, as they passed by, they saw a fig tree dried up from the roots. And Peter, remembering, said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed has withered away. Remember, it's only been a day. The fig tree has withered away. So Jesus answered and said to them, have faith in God, for assuredly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that those things he says will come to pass, he will have whatever he says. Therefore, I say to you, whatever things you ask when you pray, believe that you will receive them, and you will have them. And whenever you stand praying, if you have anything against anyone, forgive him, that your Father in heaven may also forgive your trespasses. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses. So the first thing in this reading is when evening had come, he went out of the city. And when he went out of the city, he would go to Bethany. This is a picture of modern Bethany, if you will. It doesn't look all that modern to me, but it's as modern as Bethany gets. But you can imagine what all these buildings, what everything would look like brand new. Just a nice town, just a small town, as you can see, nestled. It's actually on the side of the Mount of Olives. Actually, this map will tell you. You can see Bethany way over to the right, and you have to go around the Mount of Olives to get to the temple. That's about 2 miles of a walk each day in each direction, walking through this beautiful countryside like this. You can see lots of olive trees. That town that was there at the top there, Bethphage, that means the house of olives. And it's because there was plenty of olive trees all on the Mount of Olives. But as he was heading that direction, he came to that same tree, and in the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. I mean, this wasn't just some of the leaves kind of curled up and from one day to the next, but this tree was dried up from the roots. That doesn't happen naturally. Even when the tree is dying, it doesn't happen in one day, especially all the way to the roots. And so Peter was really remarking, and he said, he remembered this and said, Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed has withered away. I mean, that was an amazing thing. That was miraculous. So he didn't just curse the tree, but he caused it to actually dry up overnight. And that was something definitely worth remarking. This was something that only the disciples saw, at least to start with. Now, I can't imagine that after Jesus had gone away, ascended up into heaven, that every time they walked by that shriveled up tree, they didn't think about Jesus. I'm sure they did, and they told lots of other people. In fact, Mark told you and me about this withered fig tree. So Jesus certainly taught a lesson about that. And so, but he said, this fig tree which you cursed has withered away. Now, Jesus does something kind of interesting here. He answered and said to him, have faith in God. Instead of saying something like, yeah, I see what I did. If you don't bear fruit, this is what will happen to you too. Instead, Jesus said, have faith in God. For assuredly I say unto you, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that those things he says will come to pass, he'll have whatever he says. And so Jesus is thinking, I asked, he had already told him many times, I only do what the Father tells me. I only do the Father's will. And obviously he must ask, Father, what do I do here? And the Father says, curse that tree. And maybe Jesus said, can I do this? We don't know, but he got all his power from the Father. Didn't do anything without the Father giving him permission or telling him. But he says to his disciples, you have faith. I did this amazing thing. You think how I did that? I did it because of my faith in the Father and trusting in him. You guys have faith, because if you have faith, you can do just about anything that you want. And he says, if you can say this mountain, and he was standing on the Mount of Olives. If you say this mountain, go to the sea, and it'll do it. If you do not doubt in your heart, but believe that what you're asking will come to pass, it will come to pass. Wow. Now we have to talk about, was he talking to his apostles, and was this limited only to the apostles, or is that to all Christians? Well, we're told in plenty of other places that faith can do many things, not just for the apostles, but for us all. But John gives some clarification in 1 John. 1 John chapter 5, verses 14 and 15, he says, now this is the confidence that we have in him. Now we have confidence in him, talking about God, talking about Jesus. We have that confidence. We trust him. We have faith. Here it is, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us, whatever we ask, we know that we have the petitions that we've asked of him. He's repeating what Jesus had said to him and the other disciples back where we're reading about right now. We know that we have whatever we ask. If, as he says here, that little word if, we ask according to his will. Remember Jesus in the garden? Well, we haven't looked at that yet, but we've all read it. And we haven't seen it in this series of lessons yet, but in the garden, Jesus says, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me, but nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. And so Jesus asked for something and he didn't get it. He says, please let this cup pass from me. It didn't happen. Jesus had qualified it by saying, but whatever your will is, that's what I want. So what his prayer was, I'm stating what I want, but what I really want is your will to be done. And that's what was happening. That's for us also in our prayers. Many people get discouraged and leave following after God because I asked for this, and it never happened. So God doesn't hear me, so why bother? Well, they were asking for something, but they weren't asking according to God's will. Whatever it was that they were asking for was not God's will that it should be. Maybe it's something that they wanted really strongly, but it wasn't God's will that it would be. So John does clarify, and a little ahead of myself, because I have that verse that I just quoted here as an example from Jesus. It's in Luke 22. Father, if it's your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. So we have the kind of example. Even his own son didn't get everything he asked for. But he did, really, because he asked, not my will, but thine be done. Here's what I want, or here's what I would like to see happen, but what I really want is for your will to be done. And that's what we need to do with ours. And then James adds this in James chapter 4. Yet you do not have because you don't ask. And you ask and you do not receive because you ask amiss that you may spend it on your pleasures. So sometimes we ask for the wrong stuff. And the fiddler on the roof, Tevye raises his hands, goes, why can't, how hard would it be, and I'm paraphrasing, if you just made me rich? And then he sings, if I were a rich man. All familiar with that if you've seen Fiddler on the Roof. Well, he was asking for something that he had no business asking for. That we don't have a business asking for that, because it's something that we can spend it on our pleasures. And so, first of all, you got to ask. Secondly, you have to ask according to God's will. Ask for the things that God allow or wants us to ask for. And to know that, you have to look through and see examples of prayers and things that we're told to pray for, and thus and that. And we're going to look at one of those scriptures in a while. But we continue on right now with Mark chapter 11. He says, therefore, I say to you, whatever things you ask when you pray, believe that you have them, and you will have them. Notice that key word, believe. Really believe it. I mean, there have been times that I've asked things in prayer, but yeah, is he really going to do this? Not really believing. And we have to trust it. I'll wait till we get to the verse that's later on to talk about that a little bit more. But bottom line is, God is able. Ephesians 3:20 says, now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us, to him be the glory in the church by Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever. Now, this is Paul's doxology in the middle of the book of Ephesians. But he says, God is able to do more than you can possibly imagine, exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or even think. And it's according to the power that works in us. Do you think it's my power that I can do anything? Is it in your power that you do things that you think? How many times have you ever done stuff and says, that wasn't me? I didn't I don't know how that happened. Well, I do know how it happened, but it wasn't me. People think that all the time. The problem is too many people think, hey, that was me, and they get off they don't give the glory to God where it really belongs. So what he's saying is God is able to do anything. But you have to ask. You have to trust him to be able to do it. But if you're going to ask anybody, don't you want to ask somebody that's able to do it? Of course, that's it. And God is certainly able. Well, the question, what if I don't receive what I asked for? Well, one possibility is it's not according to God's will. We're supposed to ask according to his will, according to John, just like and according to Jesus' example. And the only way we can know God's will for sure is looking in the Bible, seeing things that people asked for, and God gave them that or whatever, and things that we're told to ask for. We'll see one in just a moment. Possibly we don't receive what we're asking for is because we're asking for the wrong thing. Something that, oh man, if I just had $1,000, Lord, I could do this or that, Well, maybe that's something that we're trying to do according to our own desires, not according to God's desires. Sometimes we ask with the wrong motive. How many times did David petition God to curse his enemies, to kick them aside? Sometimes God did that, sometimes he didn't. But his motive was vengeance. And maybe that's not a good motive. Then there's the lack of trust. Lack of really believing that God, maybe you believe he can, but you just don't believe that he will. I'm not worthy of that. He's not going to do this for me. Something like that, lack of trust in him. So there's reasons why we don't receive what we've asked for. Not because God doesn't hear our prayers or think about it, but sometimes the answer is no. And these are possible reasons why. We need wisdom and faith for good prayer. In James chapter 1, it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. So here's an example of something that we can pray for. In fact, we're told to pray for. If you don't have wisdom, ask God for it, and he will give it to you. He gives liberally and without reproach. He's not going to say, he's not going to get mad at you and say, well, you don't deserve this. He will give you wisdom if you ask. But he says, but in verse 6, let him ask in faith with no doubting. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. And so there has to be that faith in God. Yeah, you said you would. I believe you will. And have trust and faith in him. We need to have wisdom, so we ask for it. And God says, I'll give it to you. Then Mark continues by quoting Jesus here. He says, and whenever you stand praying, if you have anything against anyone, notice he says anything against anyone. If you have something against somebody, forgive him, that your Father in heaven may also forgive your trespasses. That puts a condition on our forgiveness. We have to forgive others, folks, if we want God to forgive us. He says, verse 26, but if you do not forgive, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses. That's how important it is to forgive other folks. Here's some more from Jesus on this same subject of forgiveness. In Matthew 18, Jesus says, moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you've gained your brother. But if he will not hear, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses to hear even the church, or refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. In other words, have nothing to do with him. Then Peter came and said to him, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. In other words, there's no limit to the really to the amount of times you forgive him. Some people have a problem with the idea of forgiving people. Sometimes people do really bad stuff, like murdering your child, or murdering your mother or father or brother, sister, your husband, wife, something really terrible. I can't forgive that person. He took this life. It's unforgivable. I can't do that. Sometimes we have the idea that if I forgive him, then he's forgiven and gets away with it scot-free. Well, that is not true. They still must answer to God. I don't have the authority to forgive them of the sin as far as their relationship with them with God. That's not under my tent. I can only forgive them as it relates to me. And forgiveness just means putting it away, acting like it didn't happen. I won't say bad things. I won't whatever. I won't take it out on you, I guess is the thing. That in itself is hard enough. But when you add that to people's minds that they're actually forgiving, if I forgive them, then they're okay with God and they get to, no, they have to answer to God. But the fact is, we all must answer to God, and God says, forgive them. So if he has to answer to God for killing somebody, you have to answer to God for not forgiving him. That is really important. But I just want everybody to keep in mind that forgiving somebody doesn't mean they're okay with God. You don't have that authority to forgive them and make their sin go away. It just goes away between you and him. And that's all it is. And so we give ourselves too much power sometimes when we think that if we forgive them, they're really forgiven. It's just between you and him that they're forgiven, or you and her. When you think about somebody saying something unkind to you, and then you you always resent them afterwards forever and ever. It comes up, and you always have bad feelings about them because of something they did 40 years ago or whatever. That's ridiculous, because it affects your relationship with God first and foremost. But it also, how can you be happy all your life if you're constantly thinking some bad thoughts about somebody for something that they did a long time ago or yesterday? Doesn't matter when. True happiness lies in the ability to be able to forgive somebody. Let them deal with God on their own. God will deal with that. So, with that in mind, I just want to make one point in closing, and that is lightning strikes. It strikes out of the blue sometimes, and you never, I don't suppose there's ever a person that was ever struck by lightning that thought they were going to get struck by lightning. But it happens. Lightning strikes, and it can happen to anybody, any age. I can remember being really impressed one time in a scary way. I was about 10, and there was a kid from, down the holler, I guess, in my grandpa's southern Indiana farm. There was a kid that got struck by lightning, and he had a padlock fastened to his belt loop, and that the lightning went for that, and it just blew a hole straight through him and killed him. 5-year-old kid, but then you hear about other people that are older, maybe much older, get struck by lightning. It doesn't matter. Lightning is just one thing that happens to people. We all know about heart attacks and strokes and getting hit by a car, or any number of hundreds of ways to go from this life that happen just like that, just like lightning. If we're going to have a relationship with God, we need to follow the things that Jesus taught us. And in this case, he's talking about you need to forgive each other. And so with this lesson, Jesus has taught us about believing, asking him for stuff, but he's also told us that our relationship with God hinges on forgiving other people. We need, since lightning strikes, you don't know when it's going to be for you, young or old, it doesn't matter. It can be tomorrow, it can be the next minute. What we need to do is to be prepared to meet our God. Once we leave this life, once that lightning strikes, if we're not prepared to meet God, there's no chance to make any preparations after that. And so these two ladies back there that were baptized last week, they're prepared to meet their God. If something were to happen in this minute or tomorrow, they're ready. And all of us who have been obedient to the gospel are prepared to meet our God. If we have any sins, that's even after we're baptized into Christ, if we sin, that can be forgiven too, and it will be forgiven. God will cleanse us in the blood of Christ. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and righteous to forgive us of those sins. So if you have sin that you need to confess to God, confess to whoever it is you sinned against or whatever, you need to do it now. You need to be ready for that lightning strike because you don't know when it's going to be. If you need to be baptized into Christ, then there's no better time like the present. Now is the only time that you have. And so as we sing this song, questioning yourself, are you prepared to meet your God?